Hello, Malcolm here, and thanks for joining me today on Tuesday Teaching Tips. It's episode 189, and it is the last recording of 2019. It'll still be relevant whenever you listen to it, but nonetheless, what I am going to do today is we're going to think about the year ahead, our hopes for preaching and teaching in 2020. Do you have a big hope for your preaching and teaching in the 12 months coming up? Now, we can't predict the way that God's going to refine us and work with us and work in us and through us regarding our preaching and teaching. We don't know what tomorrow holds, although we know who holds the future. But there's no harm in setting at least, say, one main hope for 2020, for the future 12 months. As someone said, if you aim at nothing, you're sure to hit it. So let's aim at something, even if it's only one thing. And even if we hold that thing lightly, knowing that God may refine and change those plans, that's totally fine. But have you noticed here, what I'm talking about today is hopes, not goals. Goals are fine, nothing wrong with goals. But I like the word hopes because it's a bit broader, and I think it helps us to hold it a bit more lightly. A hope is held more lightly, more easily than a goal. And a goal can be a bit narrow and restrict us at times, whereas a hope can open up broader vistas. So I want to talk about our hopes for 2020. And I've got some suggestions for us to do that, to help clarify what our hopes would be and get it clear in our own minds and hearts. So, number one, how do we work out what our best hopes are for our preaching and teaching for the next year? Well, firstly, imagine, got to use your imagination here. Imagination is powerful. God gave us one, so use it. Imagine that your preaching and teaching in 2020 is by far the most effective you've ever done. However you define effective. But imagine that it's the most effective. You know it's the most effective. Your hearers know it's the most effective. The people around you, your church, your congregation, your group, they know it's the most effective. When they look at you at the end of next year and at your preaching and teaching, they'd say, wow, they've taken it a step up. And not so much that it's about you, it's about God using you, but they could say God's taken you to the next level with your preaching and teaching. What would that feel like? And you may need to do some praying and reflecting and some time of quiet here with this, but what would you be feeling like if that happens? Not as a success, I don't mean, but in the act of it. How does it feel to be effective when you're being effective? What does that feel like? What responses are you noticing from those who are listening to you? Imagine your congregation or your group of whatever kind it is responding non-verbally, perhaps, even by their bodies, or even perhaps verbally during your teaching and preaching. What do you notice by the way that people are responding? That means that you can tell you're being effective. What is actually happening? What are you like? What are the congregation like? What is the atmosphere like? Use that imagination that God has given you. And then you should get a picture of what's different in 2020 compared to 2019, or if you're watching this on another time, the next year compared to the previous year, or the next month compared to the previous month, or even the next week compared to the previous week. Do some imagining and then write down what you see with your mind's eye about what's happening, how you're feeling, what's going on, and how you know you're being more effective than you were previously. So that's the first thing. Use that imagination. Now, secondly, think right now about your first lesson for the year ahead. Or maybe again you're watching it or listening to a different time, that's your next lesson. Mine is Friday the 3rd of January as of the day of recording. That's my next lesson. The next time I'll be teaching a full lesson, if you like, for the Thames Valley Churches of Christ. It's the first class in our new series on the Sermon on the Mount. Very excited about it. I've been working on it. I've got it ready. It needs a bit of refining, but it's more or less ready. So you're thinking about your first lesson for the next year or the next whenever it is. And if you're not sure what that's going to be, at least imagine that you have that next lesson, you know when it's going to be, pick a date. And imagine that that lesson has gone in accordance with your best hopes. If it could go as best as you would hope it could go, of course it won't be perfect, we're not talking about that, but if it could be all that you hoped it could be, given your skill set, your gifts, your experience, if it could go the best that you could do it, to be used by God. Think about that. Imagine that. Imagine that that's happened that has gone according to your hopes, and then ask yourself, what was one thing, even one small thing, that would tell you that the lesson has been particularly effective? One thing, one sign, one thing that you've seen, one thing you felt, one thing you heard that would tell you that this lesson has been effective. What would that be? Think about that first lesson and what that would look like. Thirdly, third step. What is one practical step you can take to build into that next lesson? For me, the 3rd of January. To build into that next lesson a greater likelihood that that small thing will happen. For the sake of argument, I'm doing Matthew chapter 5 verse 3. I imagine, I haven't finished imagining this yet, but I imagine that what I would like is that at the end of the meeting, there's a palpable sense of excitement about the Sermon on the Mount series. That we've begun the Sermon on the Mount series that runs through January and February. This is the first lesson. And I imagine at the end of that, people will be saying, oh my goodness, I didn't know it was going to be this good. I didn't know the Sermon on the Mount was so amazing. I mean, I know about it, but I didn't realize there's something deeper, more powerful here than I ever realized. I was kind of looking forward to this series, but now I'm really looking forward to it. I can't wait for Sunday to come when Matthew chapter 5 verse 4 will be preached. I can't wait for the following Friday when Matthew chapter 5 verse 5 will be taught. I'm hoping for that kind of reaction at the end of that first class on the 3rd of January. And so what's one thing I could do to try and make sure that might happen? What's one small thing I could do? Now that's something for me to think about. I haven't got there yet. I'm offering it out to all of us, and I'd like to know what you think, but that's the kind of thing we're talking about. I need to think about what might help that happen. What is it for you? So those are some steps we could take to imagine that our preaching and teaching is by far the most effective we've ever done. Then bring that first lesson to mind and imagine it going the best it possibly could. And then ask yourself what's one thing that you noticed. And then what can you do to build into the next lesson you're going to do to make sure that that one thing could happen in your very next lesson. And then rinse and repeat as the year goes by for each lesson you do. So what I'd like to know is, what is your main hope for your preaching and teaching for 2020? When you look forward to the year ahead, what's the one thing that you're really hoping for, that God will grow in you, develop in you, and help you in your preaching and teaching for the year ahead? It would be great to share those. So share them publicly where we can all see them so that we can learn from each other, because we learn best when we're learning in that community. If you know anybody who might benefit from this recording, then please pass the link on. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the notification button, the subscribe button. If you're listening to the podcast, then please just leave me a short review. That would be terrific. And just to say, as this is my final recording on Tuesday Teaching Tips for 2019, a huge thank you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for commenting. Thank you for feeding back to me ideas. Thank you so much for those of you who pray for me and the work I do and the work we do in the Watford Church of Christ and the Thames Valley Churches of Christ and various other places. And please pray for me. Pray for me that my next year of preaching and teaching will be by far the most effective it has ever been. That's surely God can do something in me that to make me be more effective, and I'm sure he can do the same in you. I'd love to know what your hopes are. Until the next time, have a terrific Tuesday and a wonderful week. Take care and God bless.